For the past 300 years, Maine has been tortured by ghosts. This is where we come in, to investigate these paranormal activities, and in some cases we expel the ghosts. We are not afraid. We are the Filipina Ghost Cousins, only on Keith TV.
Okay, cousins. This is a bizarre story we must check out, plus it will give us a chance to go camping. It says here that on August 20th, 1976, 4 men, from Massachusetts, went on a camping trip into the wilderness near Allagash, Maine, which is close to the Canadian border. Maine has been a hotspot for UFO activity until Loring Air Force Base and Brunswick Naval Air Station were closed due to a congressman named Thomas Andrews voting to close the bases. He also voted to stop ships from being built at Bath Iron Works, which resulted in a loss of more than 100,000 jobs throughout the state. He thought so highly of himself for doing this that he ran against Olympia Snowe for U.S. Senator in 1995 and was soundly defeated. Now, the story goes like this. Identical twin brothers, Jack and Jim Weiner, along with Charlie Faulds and Chuck Rack, drove from Boston to the Allagash River in northern Maine. They originally planned to canoe along the river, camp on the river bank, and do plenty of fishing. They parked their car and had an airplane to fly them to Telos Lake. On their second night, they noticed a bright light in the horizon, which they thought was an aircraft. They thought the light appeared odd when suddenly, the light imploded and disappeared. A few nights later, on August 26, they set camp on the shore of Eagle Lake. As sunset drew near, the men built a large campfire to burn for several hours and to be used as a locator for their campsite while out on the lake. They then headed out to fish in a canoe. Not long after settling in a position on the lake, Chuck began to get the strange feeling that someone was watching them. He began to look around to scan his surroundings and saw the same light they seen a few nights earlier hovering 200 to 300 feet above the southeastern rim of the cove. He immediately told the other men to turn to see the glowing object in the sky. While the other 3 men stared, Charlie quickly picked up the flashlight and began to blink, in Morse code an SOS signal. As soon as he did this, the light stopped moving and began to pulsate the code back. Then, it began moving toward the canoe while sending out a beam of light towards the men. The men in a panic began to paddle to the shore to their campsite. Within seconds, they were engulfed by the light. The next thing Charlie knew, he was dragging himself from the waters and making his way to the camp area. Jack and Jim were already there. Each of them was staring back at the strange object. Chuck, in the meantime, had remained in the canoe, staring at the light. Eventually, Chuck snapped out of it and stepped out of the canoe. The 4 men stood at the edge of the water and stared blankly at the craft, which was hovering no more than a few dozen feet from them. After watching for several minutes, the craft suddenly imploded, as it had done a few nights previously, and reappeared over the treetops on the other side of the lake. It then shot upwards into the sky. Before they had set out in the canoe, the group had placed several large logs on the fire to burn for a good 2 or 3 hours. They believed they had been on the water for no longer than 20 minutes or so. The men suddenly all felt exhausted and decided to sleep for the night. The next morning, the men spoke little of the incident and packed their belongings to move to a new campsite. Jim would later suffer from temporal limbic epilepsy. During his regular treatment for this condition, recurring nightmares would strike Jim. In these dreams, he and his friends from their 1976 camping trip were all in a strange place, sitting on benches naked, while bug-eyed humans were walking all around them. In one dream, he awoke to find these creatures surrounded his bed. They then levitated him upwards towards the ceiling. During one of his treatments, his doctor asked if he had ever been involved in any unusual activity. It was then that Jim revealed the episode on Eagle Lake in Allagash, and mentioned about the missing time that none of his group could recall. The doctor would then discover that a UFO investigator, Ray Fowler, was due to hold a lecture on the subject in May 1988. He convinced Jim and the rest of the group to attend this lecture. Following the lecture, Jim approached Fowler and told him of the other 3 men's encounter and of the missing time. Jack then started having nightmares. He saw the beings examining his arm in a room with intense white light, while Jim, Chuck, and Charlie sat naked on a nearby bench, not able to intervene. The creatures then examined their eyes and their mouths with a pencil-sized rod. The men had the flexibility of their arms and legs examined before they were instructed to lay on a nearby table. Numerous strange devices and instruments scanned over their bodies during this procedure. It appeared to the men that the creatures collected various tissue samples including skin, saliva, blood, and sperm. The beings were described as having large metallic glowing eyes with no lids, and their hands were insect-like, with 4 fingers. Soon the other 3 men began having similar dreams, with short, mental clips of that night on the lake. Finally, they remembered that they were instructed to dress and enter into another room. They would line up in front of a round portal in one of the walls. And one by one, they would step into this portal. Upon doing so, they would float down to the canoe on the water below. Each man described a strange sensation as they floated down to the canoe. At this point, they came to their senses and scrambled to the water's edge, turning in time to see the craft move off in the distance. After the psychiatric examinations, all 4 of the men were deemed to be mentally stable, and they all passed lie detector tests. So what do you think? Let's do it. We get a scenic drive, plane ride, and best case scenario, we get to ride in a UFO.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel. As always, please like, comment, and subscribe. I hope to see you next week.
Okay, everybody, that's a wrap.